bop bop beep boop bop bop beep boop.
What is up, guys? You already know who it is. Actually, they don't know who it is.
You already know who it is.
Anyways, we're hijacking the Beaker Bros. For now, we're going to be called the Beaker Babes. So, welcome back to another episode. We'll be interviewing our friend Praveen and exploring his research contributions to McMaster.
My name's Grace.
My name's Rio.
And if you don't know, we are both the research coordinators for Beaker Bros.
Cool. Hey guys, my name's Praveen.
Hi, Praveen.
Hi, Praveen.
Glad to be here today.
Well, we invited you to come out on our podcast to tell us about what you're researching about. So, want to walk us through what topic you're researching for your thesis?
I originally I'm researching how to make phys ed more inclusive for Ontario students, and just sort of finished that up quite recently.
Okay, but we're wondering, what made you interested in this topic? And maybe before that, walk us through the process on how you found your supervisor.
Yeah, sure. So I'd actually I'm in the life sciences program. I think I should start off with that. And so my third year, I actually got to do something called the research practicum. And through that course, I had already done some type of public health research by reaching out to different cold emailing professors and stuff like that. But this upcoming year of my fourth year, I decided to do a 15-unit thesis. In terms of how I found the professor, I kind of also, I cold emailed professors, and then I was just lucky to be able to find a prof in the space of community engagement. And then from there, I just kind of went back and forth during the summer, kind of asked them what their sort of research interests in which they could supervise me with kind of entailed, and it kind of aligned that they also were kind of doing something related to phys ed within the community, and I kind of just hopped onto that type of project.
Nice. So you mentioned community engagement, and that's actually a course you guys, my McMaster listeners, can take at McMaster. So I'm sure Grace is wondering what community engagement is really about. So Praveen, you want to explain what that course was trying to entail?
Yeah, so it's actually one of the main reasons why I kind of went into this type of research topic. Community engagement, the course itself, they have two offerings, 2 MC3 and community engagement 2 MD3. Me and Rio, we actually we go way back. We actually took community engagement 2 MD3 together, and for our project, we actually dressed up as Marvel characters to teach children within Hamilton how to exercise at home, as well as the importance of exercising to prevent health diseases and stuff like that. And I think through that whole process, for one, working with your friends, it was really fun. But especially considering that we were working on physical activity and trying to promote that for children, we encountered a lot of sort of barriers in terms of being able to accommodate all the children at first. And it was, trying to ensure all kids were able to participate. And through that process, we found that having everyone participate was truly enriching, that they were all able to learn, but also we were also able to learn from their experiences, and having that diversity really helped us learn more from that experience as well, I think. And really, I think you can attest to that as well, right?
Yeah, it was good vibes. Our professors were amazing. One of them was English major, so it was definitely hard when it came to our reflections, but at the end of the day, it was very
rewarding.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't know you guys took that course together.
Yeah, we did.
Sounds fun. Marvel characters.
I dressed up as Spider-Man. Anyways,
oh, what? Moving on. You mentioned barriers with physical education.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, who do you believe fails to be included in physical education?
Yeah, right. So originally when taking that community engagement course, we also thought it was a lot of time with individuals of specific physical disabilities or special needs. And that was my initial understanding of the concept as well, of those barriers to physical education. But it was once I really took on to the research project that I realized there are actually a lot of other barriers, things like differences in culture, differences in gender, and even teacher-related factors as well can sort of take part in being able to include a lot of these students. And so it's actually quite interesting when really looking at it to see that there are multiple different components that could exclude children from physical education.
That's really interesting. So we're going to dive more into that, and let's just look into what your purpose was for your research.
Yeah, so the actual formal research question addressed what are the barriers and facilitators of inclusive physical education for Ontario elementary students.
So you already mentioned a barrier that was obvious to you was physical disabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that came to mind immediately?
Yes, I can kind of go into why I thought this was important for myself and others as well. I think something that we kind of also realized when doing the community engagement workshop was that a lot of these children are sort of confined at home during online learning for COVID, and a lot of them were not able to sort of have the practice of physical activity for around 2 years of their lives due to COVID-19 lockdowns, and as a result that kind of led to sort of sedentary lifestyles out there. And with sedentary lifestyles, there's research to show that mental health issues can arise as well. And so having this type of inclusive physical education could allow for benefits to mental health. But on top of that as well, embracing sort of the diversity within classrooms, we know can also enable better social skills and as well make open-minded thinkers within our classroom setting, so that when these students one day become workers in society, we have a much more open-minded population, and it just benefits these students to be able to take on more tasks in the future and be able to network with everyone and anyone from different walks of life. So those are really the sort of relevancy points of why I really wanted to go for making physical education more inclusive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I was wondering, you mentioned that you're looking at physical education for Ontario elementary students, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, in terms of the methodology, how did you find the data for these students?
Yeah, so great question. I think we're often used to just using quick Google searches, but with this type of review, it's called a scoping review, meaning that we're essentially taking a look at a large part of the scholarly data out there, and then trying to find the gaps in the literature. In this type of sort of study, we therefore had to go around doing a proper methodology of a search strategy. And so I kind of had to set out an inclusion criteria early on as to the timeline, the focus of the target population we're looking at, as well as the geography, so Ontario elementary school students. But on top of that, I think a key point was the idea of inclusivity itself, right? Inclusivity, it really does encompass a lot of different aspects. And I think this sort of research, when doing it, we had to set out a lot of different terms that pertain to that idea of inclusivity. So as I kind of touched on before, it was things like special needs, ethnicity, culture, race, gender, being whether you're an immigrant, having language difficulties, accessibility issues. And so there's a whole vast amount of things that we try to cover in this inclusivity strategy. And I think even then it kind of shows you that inclusivity itself is a very holistic aspect, and there's multiple different types of avenues to approach it from. But with my sort of research, I really did try to be, as I say, as inclusive as possible with the idea of inclusivity. And so, yeah, I think that kind of answers it. Right?
Just going back there, you mentioned holistic. For the listeners who may not know what that means, are you able to give a quick definition?
Holistic?
Yeah.
Holistic? Yeah. I think to cover as much of the idea of inclusivity as possible. Just because inclusivity itself is a very broad term, and individuals can feel excluded from a certain activity for whichever way personal to them, and being able to sort of uncover that within a research setting requires us to kind of go into depth into seeing all the possible ways someone might feel excluded from an activity.
Nice. So looking at the bigger picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. So, based on research, what were the most common barriers you found?
Common barriers. So yeah, so we kind of once we had the search strategy down, we put it through a lot of different education related databases, and then we were able to sort of find a list of articles that we then divide into four main themes, being special needs, culture, gender, and teacher related factors.
What do you mean by teacher-related factors?
Well, like teacher related factors, so those are things like, for one, teacher training. So, for instance, we got generalist teachers, but also specialist teachers that are trained specifically in phys ed education. So, generalist teachers don't really get the full physical education training, and as a result, it could sort of limit their ability to put in more inclusive aspects to their curriculum, right?
Yeah.
So those are some things to think about, and as well, like the teacher resources, right? Like, are the teacher resources as um, you know, detailed enough to be able to provide teachers with the understanding of how to create a more inclusive environment? And then lastly, like I think one major thing was lack of support, and I think that's been a big sort of short staffing within education systems, where the ratio is so high for some teachers. It can get really hard to just teach the content despite trying to be inclusive as well, and that's something really, really important to consider as well.
Well, it sounds like there's lots of barriers that you found. Were there any like findings that surprised you or differed from like your initial perception or like thoughts and beliefs?
Yeah, for sure. So for one, I think um, one sort of aspect that really was like almost opened my perspective really was the idea of when you're helping individuals, say for example they have special needs, you need to have their consent to be able to help them. And sometimes if individuals are being helped without their consent, that itself can make them feel in a sense excluded, or lower have a lower sense of belonging if you're helping them without their consent. So these type of factors as well. The idea of inclusivity has a psychological approach, I would say, and being able to ask and communicate with those you want to get involved is a very important factor to trying to create that inclusive environment. On top of that, too, I think another aspect was the idea of culture. A lot of the articles we found were indigenous populations and how they might feel excluded from physical education. And it was interesting to see how a lot of the mistrust embedded within cultures from past tragedies kind of make them feel distant from being able to interact with current teachers and organizational bodies. And as a result, that leads them to feel uncomfortable in education spaces. And that's something you definitely don't want in a classroom setting, right? And I think it's really important to understand the history of where individuals are coming from before trying to create inclusivity, because if you're not well informed of people's backgrounds, it can be hard to take on that inclusive approach and how to go about it.
Sounds like cultural sensitivity is like a big thing that's like needed in the educational system.
Yeah. So I think that was definitely a major point for implementation. Teachers also, in their sort of resources that they have, they mentioned that for one, in training, they don't get enough sort of cultural sensitivity training or training on diverse student populations, and that's something that should be implemented more so. And yeah, just that understanding of how to go about conversations with diverse student populations as well.
So yeah, moving on. Your topic or your point about diversity occurring with teachers or within the system is definitely something that should be focused on, and I definitely see how the current education system is trying to push for gathering teachers within their teachers' colleges, especially teachers who have experience with diversity and have dealt with diversity, whether it be cultural or dealing with students with physical disabilities or learning disabilities.
Sure, and I think a major point as to this study as well is that Ontario itself is such a diverse population, right? Especially Southern
I
Ontario.
feel like we said diversity.
Yeah, so many times, but it's kind of hard to replace that word, right? Like, it just shows you like a lot of different people
The diversity.
within Southern Ontario, and like trying to accommodate for all of them can seem like a challenge, but really trying to ask questions and trying to communicate with those different student groups can enable effort and sort of change for the future.
Communication is key.
Okay, yeah, that's Grace's motto. Yeah.
What were some of the limitations of your research?
Yeah, sure. So I think limitations. Well, for one, this research is actually not taken up too much, and so as a result, although our research question was particularly for Ontario, there were not too many studies completed for just Ontario. So we kind of had to find the barriers that did occur in Ontario and then reach out to other parts of Canada, the research conducted in other parts of Canada, to see possible facilitators or other also barriers related to those that kind of elaborated on those initial barriers we found within Ontario. Just because there wasn't enough in Ontario, and also we felt that a lot of these barriers can still have similarities within how they're faced, and so we thought it would be good to include them. But of course, it doesn't study Ontario specifically in that sense, and so it's kind of a limitation. But also, for special needs, especially, I think we found that there was not too much first-hand experiences of students, and so that's something that we want to see in the literature as well. And there's just limitations in terms of the scope of the data as well, I would say. For one, also the idea of gender. We found that there's a lot of information on the binary gender, boy, girl, but there's not much information out there yet on the non-binary and how they face barriers to inclusivity, as well as how different aspects of the sort of demographics of children can sort of intersect to exclude individuals.
And lastly, what are some of the implications that you think that you can take from the conclusions from your study?
Yeah, so I think we kind of outlined different ways in which the research should continue further on. As I said, like ensuring we're getting student perspectives in the matter to ensure we're kind of creating solutions that are feasible, but at the same time do truly create an inclusive environment for these children. At the same time, also really trying to get at the idea of cultural competence from the sense of all the diverse student aspects within Ontario, the many different student populations, and seeing how we can best assist them. And as I said, idea of the gender non-binary and intersectionality. And lastly, like with teacher-related barriers, really trying to understand how the current teacher training platform is and seeing how it can be made better to create a more inclusive environment, I think. And so like those kind of categories, we try to establish these sort of next steps for each of those categories within the research. And that's what we hope to see as well. By really outlining the current gaps, we'll be able to maybe, take upon a certain category and explore it further ourselves, or be able to collaborate with other colleagues and trying to promote that type of research to be done in the future. And I think overall, we just want to see that we are able to include more individuals within physical education. We do want to see the benefits in mental health, physical activity, and just overall health benefits for our youth so that we can see a betterment for our population.
Wow. So well spoken.
Well, thank you for sharing with us some of your research. It sounds like there's not a lot of like you said, there's not a lot of research on this topic so far in the literature. So we are looking forward to seeing like how this research evolves, I guess, and how we can improve physical education within the school systems.
Yeah, thanks for
and address all the barriers you mentioned.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. I know this research. I was sort of thinking back and forth with it at first, but I'm really glad I pursued it. I think it is an important topic that is not discussed enough today. And I kind of realized that with my research studies, seeing that there's not too much literature out there on the topic. But I think by having these type of conversations, it can promote the awareness and kind of bring people to understand maybe different ways we can promote inclusivity in our schools. So yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Well,
That's
that is
it.
all.
That's the end of our podcast.
That's the end of Beaker Babes Part 1.
Part 1.
Okay,
Okay, bye.
bye.